The boy stood at the center of the stage, where the lights felt too bright and the silence too heavy. The polished floor reflected his face back at him, thinner than he remembered, eyes wide and trying to be brave. His shoes were worn, the soles smoothed down by years of walking, and his jacket, clearly borrowed, hung awkwardly from his shoulders, sleeves a little too long. He clasped his hands together, not to pray exactly, but to stop them from shaking. The crowd beyond the lights was a blur of shadows and murmurs, a living thing breathing and waiting. Simon Cowell sat behind the judge's table, pen resting loosely between his fingers. He had seen thousands like this, kids with stories, dreams wrapped in nerves, hope stitched together by desperation. He glanced up briefly, then back down, already preparing himself for another polite letdown. The show had taught him efficiency. You learned quickly when to listen closely and when to brace yourself for mediocrity. Nothing about this moment suggested surprise. The host asked the boy his name. His voice, when he answered, was soft but steady. He explained where he was from, a small village where the nights were quiet and the days were long. He spoke of singing at home, of learning melodies from an old radio that crackled more than it played, of practicing when the house was asleep so no one would think he was dreaming too loudly. His words were simple, unpolished, and honest. The audience reacted the way audiences often do, gentle sympathy, cautious curiosity. Simon nodded faintly, eyes half-focused. He had heard this rhythm before: hardship, hope, a fragile leap of faith. He didn't dismiss it, but he didn't lean into it either. Experience had taught him that a touching story didn't guarantee a remarkable voice. He made a small note on his paper, more out of habit than expectation. The boy shifted his weight, feeling the heat of the stage through the thin soles of his shoes. He remembered the journey to get here, the bus rides, the borrowed money, the way his family had hugged him as if he were leaving for something much bigger than a competition. He carried those moments inside his chest now, heavy and warm. When the judge asked what song he would sing, he paused, then answered with quiet confidence. A few people in the audience exchanged looks, surprised by the choice. Simon's pen stilled for just a moment. That was an ambitious pick. Too ambitious, perhaps. He finally looked up fully, studying the boy with sharper interest. There was no arrogance in the boy's posture, no attempt to impress before earning it. Just a calm readiness, like someone who had been waiting for this exact second longer than anyone realized. The music had not started yet, but the atmosphere shifted. The boy took a breath, slow and deep, as if anchoring himself to the floor. He closed his eyes briefly, not out of fear, but focus. In that pause, the stage felt suspended between two possibilities: the quick dismissal or the unexpected beginning. Simon leaned back slightly, arms folding, skepticism still present but no longer careless. He had learned, over the years, that sometimes the quietest contestants carried the loudest surprises. Still, he kept his guard up. Expectations were dangerous things on a judging panel. The boy opened his eyes as the first note was about to play. He didn't look at the judges or the crowd. He looked straight ahead, beyond the lights, as if imagining a place where his voice already belonged. In that instant, before a single sound escaped his lips, no one in the room knew it yet, but everything was about to change. The first note rolled out slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing the air. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was controlled, warm, and unexpectedly deep. The sound traveled, farther than anyone expected, settling into the room with a weight that made people shift in their seats. Simon's eyes lifted fully now, his pen forgotten between his fingers. This wasn't the fragile voice he had prepared himself for. The boy stood still, shoulders relaxed, jaw steady. There was no strain in his face, no sign of forcing the sound upward or pushing it beyond its limits. The tone carried a richness that felt borrowed from another era, smooth, grounded, confident. It didn't mimic, it embodied. Each note landed exactly where it should, clean and deliberate, as if the song had been waiting years for this voice to find it. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Heads turned. A few people leaned forward without realizing they had done so. One judge's mouth parted slightly in surprise. Simon's posture changed almost imperceptibly, his skepticism giving way to attention. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was listening, truly listening, the way he did only when something rare unfolded in front of him. The boy's voice grew stronger as the melody progressed, not louder, but fuller. It carried emotion without exaggeration, confidence without arrogance. There was an ease to it that couldn't be taught, Something born from years of singing alone, without applause, without feedback, just instinct and feeling. The stage lights reflected off his eyes, which now looked distant, focused on a place only he could see. Simon felt a familiar but rare sensation, surprise layered with respect. He had heard voices trained to perfection, voices polished by coaches in studios. This was different. This was raw in the best way, untouched by trends, unaffected by expectation. He sat up straighter, elbows resting on the table now, gaze locked on the boy. The room seemed to narrow, the audience fading until only the voice remained. As the song reached a turning point, the boy didn't rush it. He allowed silence to breathe between phrases, letting anticipation build naturally. That pause, brief but intentional, sent a shiver through the crowd. Then he continued, the tone deepening, the emotion sharpening. It felt personal, not performative, as if he were singing for himself rather than for approval. One judge glanced at Simon, searching his face for a clue. Simon didn't react. His expression was serious, focused, almost analytical, but beneath it something had shifted. This was no longer about whether the boy could sing. The question had quietly transformed into how far this voice could go. The audience, once restless, was now completely still. No coughs, no whispers, no movement. People held their breath without realizing it, afraid that any sound might break the spell. The boy's voice filled the space where noise used to live, commanding attention without demanding it. Simon's mind raced, not with criticism, but with calculation. He imagined stages bigger than this one, audiences larger, lights brighter. The voice didn't shrink under that imagination, it expanded. That realization made his chest tighten slightly. He had learned to trust that feeling. It didn't come often, but when it did, it was rarely wrong. As the final notes approached, the boy maintained control, resisting the temptation to oversell the ending. He let the song resolve naturally, gracefully, with confidence. The last note lingered in the air, vibrating softly before fading into silence. For a split second, no one reacted. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Simon stared at the boy, eyebrows raised now, disbelief finally breaking through his composed exterior. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head just once, not in disapproval, but amazement. In that moment, it was clear to everyone watching, especially Simon, that something extraordinary had just happened. Not a lucky performance, not a fluke, but the arrival of a voice that had been waiting patiently for the world to stop and listen. The silence shattered all at once. Applause surged from the audience like a wave breaking free, loud and uncontrollable. People stood without being asked, hands clapping above their heads, voices rising in disbelief. The boy blinked, momentarily unsure if the sound was real or something his imagination had created to protect him from disappointment. His chest rose and fell quickly, adrenaline rushing through him as he lowered the microphone slightly, still holding his posture as if the song might call him back at any second. Simon finally moved. He leaned back in his chair, then forward again, lips pressed together before curling into a slow, reluctant smile. He shook his head, this time more noticeably, as if trying to make sense of what he had just heard. When he picked up the microphone, the audience quieted instantly. That alone told the boy how important the moment had become. "I didn't expect that," Simon said, his voice calm but edged with surprise. "At all." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That voice doesn't come from training. It comes from somewhere deeper." The crowd murmured in agreement. Simon glanced down the table, then back at the boy. "You didn't try to impress us. You just sang. And that's why it worked." The boy swallowed hard. His hands trembled now, not from fear, but from release. He nodded, unable to speak yet. Another judge praised the control in his voice, the maturity, the way he respected the song instead of overpowering it. Each comment felt unreal, like praise meant for someone else. He had spent years singing where no one listened. Now every word landed like proof that those years hadn't been wasted. Simon leaned closer to the microphone again. "You know," he said, "people come on this stage every day trying to be someone else. You didn't. You were completely yourself, and somehow, that made you timeless." He let the words sit. "That's rare." The boy's eyes burned, but he refused to cry. He thought of his family watching from home, crowded around a small screen, probably holding their breath just like he had moments ago. He imagined their smiles, the way his mother would press her hand to her chest when she was proud. That image grounded him. When the votes came, they were immediate and unanimous. Each judge's answer drew louder cheers, until the final confirmation echoed through the hall. The boy covered his mouth, overwhelmed, shoulders shaking as the realization settled in. He bowed awkwardly, again and again, gratitude spilling out in silent gestures. Simon stood as the applause continued, extending a hand across the table. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward and shook it. The grip was firm, respectful. "You earned that," Simon said quietly, so only he could hear. "Don't ever forget it." As the boy walked off the stage, the lights seemed warmer, the corridor wider. Crew members smiled at him, some offering quick congratulations. He felt lighter, as if a door he hadn't known existed had finally opened. Backstage, he paused for a moment alone, pressing his hand against his chest to steady his breathing. Out in the hall, Simon watched him go, thoughtful now. He had judged thousands of performances, said yes and no more times than he could count. But some auditions stayed with you, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. This was one of them. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Talent never erased struggle overnight, but it changed the direction of it. For the boy, that stage was no longer just a place he had visited. It was a beginning. He didn't know where the journey would lead, how far, how fast, or how difficult it would be. He only knew one thing with certainty as he disappeared into the backstage shadows. The voice he once used only in the dark had finally been heard.